Welcome, everyone, to my author spotlight. Today I'm here with Erin Nieto. Erin is a former academic writing instructor and art appraiser, now blending her passion for words and art into the creation of historical fiction novels. She lives in Champaign, Illinois, with her husband, two children, and a small menagerie of cats. Erin, I am so happy to have you on here today.
Thank you, Brandy, for having me. It's a pleasure.
You're welcome. Well, today we're talking about Love and Conductivity, Erin's debut novel releasing on February 11th, 2025. And Erin, you've had such a fascinating journey with writing this novel. You had a bit of a real life adventure with
Yeah.
this, and I would love for you to tell the audience just how did this novel come about?
Well, you mentioned that I was an art appraiser, and that's how I came to this story. It was 10 years ago this month. I was called to an estate that was being liquidated to appraise their collection of art, which is most of the jobs that I was doing at that time were estate liquidations. Um, And I live in a university town, so we've got some really, really interesting estates here. Champaign, Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. Um, this was the estate of a 90-year-old physicist. But then I quickly learned that the house had belonged to his parents. They had bought the house in 1938 and lived there for most of their lives. Um, And from the moment I walked in, it was just one of those fascinating states. You can really tell when you walk into a place and people who lived there were interested in everything. Um, Arts, sciences, shelves and shelves of books. Um, the two generations of scientists living in this house, and they had a basement that had a full chemistry lab, a bomb shelter, which is another part of the story. He was part of the Manhattan Project later on in his life. Um, and my head was just spinning. I was there to look at the art, but yeah, it was overwhelming. And as I was going through the house, the estate handlers were going through boxes and boxes of personal effects. It looked like they were the kind of people who just saved everything. They had correspondence going back to the 19th century, family photos going back to the 19th century. And they had just brought down a box of correspondence from the attic, and the estate handler was going through everything with the intention of either throwing it out or pricing it for sale. The physicist did not want to be contacted about anything, so it was her discretion. And she pulled a letter out of a box and she said, "I don't know what I'm going to do with these letters." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she read the letter to me, and it was from Thomas Irwin Phipps, who was a chemistry professor at the U of I for decades, to the woman who would become his wife, Eleanor Morgan, in about 1920. And it was the most touching letter that I had ever heard. And I was, you know, middle-aged, grown cynical about love, that kind of thing. And just like whatever he said in that letter, and to this day, I don't remember which one it was because it just shocked me. Um, because it was so intimate and so beautiful. Um, my cynicism just melted away. And and I said, "Mary, humanity needs this. You can't throw this away." Um, so she decided that she was going to bundle all of these letters, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of family correspondence, to sell them for $2 a bundle at the sale. Um, and here I go to the sale thinking I need to find that one letter that she read because that's beautiful and I need to know more about it. Um, so I went to the sale and I was just grabbing bundles that looked like they were from about that same era, thinking, oh, I hope I find it. I hope I find it among all of these. Um, and I got home and I started reading and realizing that they were all like that. All of the letters that they wrote to each other over the course of 3 years were just the most beautiful, poetic things I'd ever read. Um, so then I was writing at the time. I had, a couple manuscripts that I was working on, and those just fell by the wayside entirely. I couldn't focus on anything but getting these letters together and putting them in order and making sense of this world and this relationship that these people shared 100 years ago. Um, so it became a long process after the fact. That the estate sale was long over. It only lasted 3 days, I think. Um, But in the meantime, everything was dispersed to the wind. So I'm frantically, trying to find other people who bought the letters, trying to find family photos, trying to find, all of the resellers that I knew that had gone to the estate and bought things. Did you buy the letters? Did you buy family effects? I need them. I need to know this story. Um, and that just propelled me on this journey of understanding these brilliant, fascinating people, um, and this crazy love story between them.
That is so fascinating, and because I have read your book, I know what you're talking about, and just his words do break cynicism, and they're
Mm,
so endearing and heartfelt, and this entire experience of this novel just slows down time and gives
mhm.
the reader an immersive experience into another era, into another gentler way. So I so appreciated this and the hard work that you did to find this information and to put it together. So how long did it take you from the time that you purchased the letters to get them all together and to get a timeline on their story?
Uh, wow. Well, I had to track down some people. So it probably took me about a year to find the majority of the correspondence but the courtship correspondence, that is. There's still some out in the wild out there that I never could find. So they exist in the world. Somebody might find them someday.
I actually didn't know that. So if anyone
Yes.
ever watches this video and they have found these letters, they'll know to contact you for sure.
I saw some on eBay that I bid on and didn't win. And I mean,
Oh,
they're
wow.
out there. They're out there.
Awesome.
Um, so I probably had the majority of the correspondence within a year. Transcribed it, tried, I guess, it's hard to talk about this without giving away spoilers if anyone's interested in reading the book, but what am I going to do? Um, I Once they got sort of their rhythm in writing to each other down, they started writing to each other every day. Um, and they exchanged hundreds of letters. So just to line them all up, at first it was a conversation and then it just turned into, a symphony. Um, so in order for it to have a narrative structure, I knew that I needed to come in and sort of create the story around the letters, doing my best to take what I knew to be true from their correspondence and what I guessed to be true between the lines of their correspondence and create this world. Um, and that took years. That
Mhm.
took years because my guiding force was to create something that would do justice to the beauty of their correspondence. Um, so I couldn't half-ass it. I really had to spend as much time as it was going to take to bring it to the level that I felt would honor Erwin and Eleanor and their relationship. Um, I worked with a writing coach for 2 years, 2.5 years, to come up with the first draft. And then I revised for hmm, another 4 years.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Right.
it was a very long process.
It's funny that beginning novelists think that, you just dash it off and it's done.
No. It's beautiful when it reads that way, right?
Right.
When you imagine me just sitting down and typing all of this out. Yes. But
Totally.
no, no, that's absolutely not the reality.
Never is. Well,
Mm.
Erwin and Eleanor are both fascinating individuals, so perhaps you could tell the audience a little bit more just about who they were as people.
Sure. They were both born in 1895. Um, Eleanor was from Goldsboro, North Carolina. Erwin did most of his growing up in Austin, Texas. Uh, they met when Eleanor was teaching at the University of Oklahoma, and Erwin was on his way back from serving in World War One, and he was taking a train back to Austin. But his sister Helen was teaching at Oklahoma University and was Eleanor's roommate, um, which is how they came together. Again, spoiler alert.
Mhm.
They met, they corresponded, they married 1923 and remained married for the rest of their lives. Um, Irwin was a professor of chemistry here at the University of Illinois for several decades, but he got a Guggenheim Fellowship to study in Germany in 1930 31. His field of expertise was he was a physical chemist, so he worked with the reactions of metals in chemicals. Um, Later on in his career, he worked with molecular beam technology. He worked at the University of Chicago as part of the Manhattan Project in working with plutonium. And he was one of the very, very few people in the country who was willing to do that, who had the background and expertise to do that. Um, Fascinating person. And then the son, whose estate that they were clearing out 10 years ago, um, was a physicist who was famous in his own right, Thomas Irwin Phipps Jr., who continued his dad's work on molecular beam technology, working for the Navy and then also at China Lake. So it's very distinguished family.
Mhm. And then Eleanor, she was a teacher of poetry, and she just had that beautiful intellectual mind and just saw the world in a very poetic way.
She did. She did. And although, I mean, it's maddening for us to think about it now that because she was the wife of a faculty member, she was not allowed to work, which would think very differently about that today. She continued to write poetry. She made jewelry. She worked with metals also, but in a more sort of decorative way than the chem lab. Um, and after she passed in 1968, Irwin published a collection of her verse.
Oh, wow. I didn't
Yes,
know that. That's
yes, he
wonderful.
did. He did. So she is published.
Oh. Well, on that note, I was wondering if you have a favorite passage of your book to read for the audience.
Well, I have many, so it was hard to
You
choose.
do.
I feel like because of the conversation that we've had here, um, first, it might be worth reading the blurb so that anyone who's interested has a kind of
Mhm.
sense of the story itself. But then after the blurb, I would like to read the first two letters that they exchanged.
That would be wonderful.
Because I think that that gives them a taste, and it's in their words. I did very little editing, if any, of these two letters, so you really get a flavor of their personalities from the get-go with these. But the story, as it is, love and adventure don't mix, or so thinks Eleanor Morgan, a teacher of poetry in 1918 Oklahoma. And she's heard the call to adventure all her life through books, through histories and fairy stories, entering their worlds and their fancies. This kind of imaginative escape has given her life some of the most bright and shining days. And now, as a grown woman, she's desirous of early 20th century life's real adventures, seeing the West, joining the Navy, exploring the North Pole, and a future with no thought of romance. But sparks fly, quite literally, on the night she meets Irwin Phipps, a chemist turned lieutenant, on his way home to Austin after the armistice. Their chance encounter is brief but electric, one she's not able to forget as much as she tries. Then, over a year later, with a continent now between them, an errant Valentine's Day greeting from Irwin arrives. The embers in her heart are fanned back to life, her dreams of adventure having thus far gone unfulfilled, eclipsed by the demands of her family and profession. But letting her guard down, revealing her true self, and confronting her rejection of love may prove to be the most perilous or gorgeous adventure of all.
And it is a gorgeous adventure.
Yes. And I mean, it's a story about a growing intimacy and how daunting that is even for the best minds. The best minds even have trouble. Okay. And this is the errant greeting that she received. This arrived to her more than a year after they'd met. And during that year, she really tried to put him out of her mind and she couldn't. And she assumed that, he didn't have any particular care for her. Um, but this letter arrived and changed everything. February 6th, 1920, Berkeley, California. Dear Miss Morgan, how are you going to know that I had a New Year wish all ready to send you, but couldn't learn your address in time, unless I write and tell you so? I hope you'll play like it's New Year now. You remember about the geese in the rhyme, don't you? One flew east and one flew west. History seems to be repeating itself in our cases. The main difference is that the goose who flew east was going home, while the one going west got farther away all the time. Apparently, some geese have a better sense of direction than others. Please, if you have time, write and tell me how you are and whether or not you favor Mr. Hoover for our next president. I don't mean to limit you to these topics, but I suggest them in a selfish way as things of great interest to me. And perchance you don't have the time, I shall not bother you with such again. With very best wishes, I am sincerely yours, Thomas E. Phipps.
I remember that letter.
And it's worth noting that there was a continent between them at this point. He was in Berkeley, California, and she was back home in Goldsboro, North Carolina. And this is her response. February 16th, 1920, Goldsboro, North Carolina. Dear Mr. Phipps, your New Year's greeting reached me on the 14th of February, a more interesting date than January 1st, after all. The school in which I am now teaching poetry has been closed for weeks on account of influenza. The epidemic is worse than last year, with a greater number of cases and more distress among the poor. Not having had the flu last year or this, I feel as if I've been cheated out of a universal human experience. Everyone can discourse about sinking spells, palpitations, and hair coming out, and I am left out of the conversation. The implication is that I have the fragile constitution of a Missouri mule. I shall be glad to go back and begin work. You are finding your study interesting, I hope. Your sister used to tell me what you were doing, and I envied you beyond measure. California has always had a golden sound to the southerner with wanderlust. You won't tell me its enchantment is only that of distance, will you? I was very glad to get your note. Well, it's a long time before another New Year's, but there's Easter or the 4th of July down the road. Sincerely, Eleanor Morgan. And there's so much between those lines. There's so much between those lines. And that is what the book is about.
Yes, those are the letters that started it all.
Yes.
Well, Erin, I think the audience might like to hear what do you do when you're not writing?
When I'm not writing, I have a family. I have two high school age boys. So that keeps me pretty busy. Um, when I'm not writing, what I like to do is spend time in nature. That really grounds me. In fact, I get grumpy when I when time goes by and I'm not able to. Hiking, foraging, cooking, reading. Um, I say that my writing is where I put my reading. So, it's very essential to me in the practice of writing to read all the time.
Absolutely. And on that note of reading makes good writers, what advice do you have for aspiring novelists?
Um, let's see. Aside from reading, is persistence, persistence. Um, I really truly feel like successful writers are just the ones who don't quit. And that more than anything, more than talent, more than anything else is really the secret sauce. Um, when I was working on Love and Conductivity, and it was a very, very long journey, as we've said, I kind of had this image in my mind of every day I would take a cup of water and put it into a swimming pool.
Mm,
And it felt like nothing. It felt like I was just spinning my wheels, not doing anything. But if you do that every day, it fills up.
I love that.
Someday, someday it will be filled up. Even if it's just a cup, just you gotta just keep putting in your cup.
Absolutely. Every day.
Yeah.
Well, where can readers find out more about you and where can they buy your book on February 11th and every day after that?
Well, at all major online retail outlets. Um, and if you want to read more about the story, and some things that I've said here today, you can look at my website, which is as in Sam, Nieto.com.
Well, Erin, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Brandy. It's been a pleasure.
I agree.